we go. Okay. Okay, so we are officially live. I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to pop in and say hello and let me know you're here. Tell me where you're from, how you heard about this webinar. I'm going to see if I can bring up the comments here. Give me a second. We'll give people a few moments to trickle in before we officially get started. If you see me looking over here, it's because this is where I see everybody saying hello and asking questions. So I'll be checking the feed over here. Okay, still waiting. I'm just going to give it a few more minutes for people to join us. Feel free to say hello, introduce yourself, let me know what you're hoping to learn from this webinar. Okay, maybe while everyone's trickling in, I am going to just get started and introduce myself, talk a little bit about what we're going to do here in this webinar. Let me go. Sorry, I'm just getting all my windows. I've got like a bunch of windows open. I'm just trying to get organized. Feel free to say hello when you come in. Let everyone know you're here. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Allison Spokes, and I have been a tarot reader for a very long time. I got my first deck at the age of 12, and I was devoted to learning a variety of divination methods. In my late teens, I studied tarot pretty hardcore, and I dabbled in numerology and astrology as well. I was determined that after graduation, I was going to open my own metaphysical shop and I was going to be a professional reader. Skip ahead a few years, so I'm not going to tell you my entire life story, but later in my late 20s, I put all my cards away and went into the tarot closet, so to speak. There wasn't this wasn't a conscious decision. It wasn't like there was an incident that caused me to like pull back or hide it away. It was just that I was going through a bit of a major transition in my life around that time. I was going through a divorce. I moved to a new city. I started a new relationship, and I was just trying to figure out who I was on the other side of this change and transition. So most people who have known me since that time have gotten to know me for my fairy artwork. If you don't already know, I paint fairies in digital media, and I self-publish my work on a variety of gifts and merchandise. And it was only a couple years ago that I decided to come back out of the tarot closet and start reading again. Although my artwork was very fulfilling and I still enjoy it to this day, I was starting to feel like there was a little piece of me that was missing. Like I wasn't being my complete and whole self. And my cards were literally creeping back out of the tarot closet and appearing on my desk and on my coffee table. I would start using little excuses like, I think I have a tarot card I could use as a reference for this painting that I'm working on. And yeah, they started just coming out, and I wasn't reading with them, but they were making their way slowly back out of the literal closet. And it was around that time I had just opened my art studio, had opened a shop, and I had the space, and the timing just felt right. It was time to start using my cards again and become a professional reader again. And so that was part of making me feel whole again, having all the things back in my life that I love. I had my art, I had the fairies, I had my geeky hobbies and pastimes, and I had tarot back. And although I had all the pieces kind of out in full sight again, I wasn't really sure how to fit them all together. I still felt like I had my spiritual community, but I'm also a very pragmatic person. I value science and evidence, and I'm a bit of a skeptic a lot of the time. And so although I value my spiritual friends and my spiritual community, I felt like in order for them not to feel like I was judging them, I had to hide that kind of more science-oriented, pragmatic part of myself. And I didn't want them judging me either. It was kind of a two-way. So I just, smiled and nod. And then it was the same with my academic friends and my geeky friends who I didn't want them to know or judge me for my spiritual side as well. So I felt for a long time that I was part of two tribes that would never cross paths or never get along. And so I felt like I had to hide a part of myself from each community, and it was really uncomfortable. And I went through that for about a year until I had to realize that the problem wasn't them, the problem was coming from me. It was that I was so afraid of what others were going to think of me that I wasn't being true to myself. And it was my fear that was stopping me from putting those pieces together and making them fit. And once I got over my fear, I was able to see the link clear as day. And that is what I'm going to share with you today. So the link between geek culture and storytelling and myth and the tarot. Okay, so here's what's included in this webinar tonight, or the video if you're watching at a later date. I'm going to briefly explain as briefly as possible because there's a lot to it, the hero's journey, which has to do with stories and myths and how they mirror the human experience. And then I'm going to talk about the fool's journey, which explains the fool on a journey through the remaining major arcana cards and how that is a reflection of the human experience. So there is our first link. Next, I'm going to show you some famous nerdy quotes, some tidbits of wisdom that come from comic books, video games, movies, and television, and show you where you can find those same lessons, those same bits of wisdom in the tarot. And so if you're familiar with tarot, you might want to turn this into a bit of a game where you guess the card based on the quote that I share with you. After that, I have a special offer for everyone who sticks around. Everyone who remains watching, there will be a special offer for you. It is limited. You do have to act quickly. There is an expiry date. So if it interests you, I encourage you to act fast. And then lastly, we're going to wrap it up. I have an exercise to share with you that you can do after this video is over. And hopefully, if there's any time left, we can do a little Q&A and a chat in the discussion before we wrap up. So feel free, you don't have to wait till the end. Do leave comments and questions. Let me know who you are, say hello along the way. But no, I do have to let you know there is this awkward 10-second delay. So if you see me moving too fast or I'm not responding fast enough to your question or comment, that's because I'm living 10 seconds in the future. So I will try to slow down and pause regularly to read your comments or questions. All right, let me go to my slides. Okay. So hopefully you can see those there in the video. This 10-second delay is really messing with me. Okay. Can we see them? Yay, nay. Oh, yes, you can. Good. Okay. Whew. Sorry for that. I have two screens going here, and one of them is working and one of them is not. So hold on just one sec. I gotta do some troubleshooting. Okay. Okay, so begin at the beginning, go on till you come to the end, and then stop. Wisdom from Lewis Carroll. And okay, so let's start with this quote. This is from a very old book called Transcendental Magic. It's over a century old, and it was written by Eliphas Levi, who was a French occultist and ceremonial magician. And this was his famous opening line. So let me read it to you. Behind the veil of all the hieratic and mystical allegories of ancient doctrines, behind the darkness and strange ordeals of all initiations, under the seal of all sacred writings in the ruins of Nineveh or Thebes, on the crumbling stones of old temples and on the blackened visage of the Assyrian or Egyptian Sphinx, in the monstrous or marvelous paintings which interpret to the faithful of India the inspired pages of the Vedas, in the cryptic emblems of our old books on alchemy, in the ceremonies practiced at reception by all secret societies, there are found indications of a doctrine which is everywhere the same and everywhere carefully concealed. So I absolutely love this quote because essentially what it is saying is that sacred knowledge is only worth reverence and veneration if it's kept hidden and exclusive. And yet the wisdom that is out there across all times and all places is the same. So it's not really that secretive. It's a facade. And as long as it feels like as long as we pretend that it's secret and mysterious, it remains special. And there's this weird belief that we have that somehow if it becomes mainstream, it loses its value. But the only thing it loses by tearing open the curtain is power. And power can be corrupted. The wisdom doesn't lose its value. And if it does, then it never really had any true value to begin with. So they say that there is no manual or guidebook for life, but I disagree. I think I have found it in this 78 deck of cards. To me, it is like a troubleshooter for everyday life. If you feel stuck or confused or what have you, you consult the cards and it gets you out of trouble. It fixes the problem, or it tells you what you need to do to fix the problem. And so what I want to do is I want to add to this list of, quote, mystical allegories, sacred writing, marvelous paintings, because what are these things really? They're storytelling. the most effective way of sharing wisdom is through telling stories. And the tarot is a storytelling tool as well. And so I want to add to this list that I just read from Levi's book, modern storytelling mediums like video games and role-playing games and television, movies, science fiction novels, comic books that are also chock full of wisdom disguised as entertainment. And they have this way of educating us on what it means to be human just as well as any spiritual scripture. Okay. So here we have two theories. One on myth and storytelling that was introduced by Joseph Campbell in his The Hero of 1,000 Faces in 1949. And the hero's journey is essentially a template for storytelling that combines a formula of 17 stages of the hero and a mix of archetypal characters. And these themes or stages are found in just about every great story ever told. And then we have the Fool's Journey, which is another metaphor for the journey of life, as the Fool walks through the remaining major arcana cards on a journey to discover his own wholeness. So we're going to talk about those two theories and stages and how they reflect the human experience. Okay. So here we have an image of the hero's journey, the 17 stages of Campbell's monomyth. If we start with the top half of the circle, this represents the common world, the world that the hero has grown up in, has formulated an identity within. This is the world that he knows and is comfortable in. And the bottom half of the circle is the unknown world, the supernatural world, the world full of danger and adventure. This is the scary stuff. This is outside. If we look at this as a reflection of our own human experience, this would be the stuff that is outside our comfort zone. But this is where we grow. This is where we encounter adventure and excitement and fulfillment. So I wanted to go through each of these. I've got great examples of all 17 stages found in our favorite movies and comics and novels, but I don't have time. I wish I did, but I don't. So I'm going to just kind of touch on a few important ones. And if you have any questions, feel free to, sorry, I'm just checking my comments here. Feel free to leave me a comment or a question, and maybe we can go back to it. Okay, so let's start with the call to adventure, because of course that is super important. The call to adventure basically kickstarts the whole journey. It can happen usually in one of three ways. There can be an actual invitation where somebody literally knocks on your door and says, "Hey, I have an opportunity for you. Do you want to come with me?" That is one call to adventure. Another popular call to adventure is when there is an accident or a mishap or some big mistake was made that locked the hero into this, that they just stumbled on it when they weren't looking. And this happens often in comic books, especially with superheroes who discover their powers later in their life as opposed to those who are born with their powers. It's almost always some horrible science experiment that went terribly wrong and left this ordinary guy with some supernatural ability. So examples, Peter Parker gets bit by the radioactive spider. That was his call to adventure. Harry Potter gets his letter from Hogwarts. That was his call to adventure. The other way you can be called to adventure is by force. So perhaps maybe the hero was kidnapped and then had to get out of that situation, or they were drafted into war. That would be an example of it being forced upon them, like a lack of choice. Now, often there's this theme where the hero receives the call and then they refuse it, or they're in denial, like, nope, you got the wrong guy, this can't be me, ask someone else, I'm not the right guy for the job, I don't think so, that sounds too hard. There's always something where they have some kind of fear or self-doubt or insecurity or inadequacy that prevents them from accepting the adventure. And then we have supernatural aid, and this just kills me. I find this super funny, but if you look for it, it's there more often than you'd realize. The supernatural aid is usually in the form of some old man or wizard character who convinces the hero to accept the call, and more often than not, gives the hero some kind of supernatural tool that they can use at some point on their adventure. So Luke Skywalker meets Ben Kenobi, who gives him a lightsaber and teaches him about the Force. And we have Harry Potter, who meets Dumbledore, and it was Dumbledore that gave him the invisibility cloak. And then we have heroes like Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, who at the Wall is counseled by Jorah Mormont, who gives him Longclaw, the Valyrian steel sword that we discover has, in a way, supernatural abilities. So it's there. That is a common theme, is this supernatural aid that eventually convinces the hero that they need to go on this journey. And then there's the crossing of the threshold. So this is when the hero leaves their common world and embarks on some adventure. This is when Frodo leaves the Shire. This is when Neo unplugs himself from the Matrix. In the belly of the whale, this is the point in the story when the hero has gone too far to turn back. Now they are in a place of a potential danger. They're in a situation of real danger. So the best example I could think of for this was when Katniss Everdeen enters the arena of the Hunger Games. There's no turning back at this point. Even though, you know, she's just entered, nothing has happened to her, but she's in major danger. And then we have a road of trials. So this is just a series of tests, tasks, obstacles that the hero has to go through. Usually it's during these trials that they meet their companions, their friends, and their support that helps them through the journey. Now the next three here, we have what's called Meeting with the Goddess, Temptation, and Atonement with the Father. So these titles are a little bit misleading, especially when we're using them in modern day stories. The Meeting of the Goddess is really just referring, these labels are also, I should say, very, they refer to a male hero, let's just put it that way. They're kind of male biased. So if the hero was female, for example, it wouldn't be a meeting with the goddess. It would be a meeting with a masculine counterpart versus a feminine one. But essentially what it is in this phase of the story is when there's a balance of masculine and feminine forces that make the hero feel whole. It's a pairing with often another character. It can be romantic, it can be friendship, it can be siblings. But it's usually someone of the opposite gender who brings the hero strength and balances out their flaws or personality somehow. So in Star Wars, we have Luke and Leia, the twins who reunite, and Luke draws strength from his sister. She brings him balance and keeps him, in many ways, from following his father's footsteps. Katniss meets Peeta, and with that pair, you know, they had some opposite personalities, but they drew strength from each other and created balance. Harry and Hermione, for example. Now, temptation, Campbell calls it temptation of woman, but it's not always women who are the temptresses. There's all kinds of temptation that the hero can encounter yes, sometimes it is, you know, that sexual temptation from women who are pulling them away from their task or what they're supposed to do. But it's that temptation to deviate from their task, to take the easy road, either to give up, to, you know, they maybe stumble into a place that has a much better offer. Things are much easier. Let's just stay here. Let's just party with these guys, drink beer, hang out in the hot tub or whatever it is. It's so much better than risking our lives going on this adventure. Why don't we just give up? So we see this theme. You know, James Bond had his femme fatales, so that would be temptation of a woman. You know, but Frodo, he tried to give the ring away many times to unload his burden. His temptation was to get rid of the ring before he destroyed it. And then the atonement with the Father, this is essentially, this represents, the metaphor here is the son and father relationship, where the son struggles to seek his father's approval, but at the same time, he's also in competition with his father. But this is a metaphor for any kind of ultimate looming power that makes the hero feel subservient or subordinate to. The goal of the hero is to feel empowered and take down this big, whatever has the most power, this big, you know, slay the dragon, take down the villain. In Star Wars, for example, we do see that father-son relationship because the villain is the father. And George Lucas actually got counsel from Joseph Campbell to write his Star Wars saga. They worked very closely together. So, yeah, George Lucas was heavily influenced by Campbell's hero's journey theory when he wrote Star Wars. Sherlock Holmes has to find the perfect logic to solve the crime. He is not going to be bested by someone or something more smarter than he is. So that is his ultimate power. Harry Potter had a complicated father relationship because he had so many father figures in that story. He had his own father, James, who he, you know, had this vision of how, you know, perfect his father must have been, but discovers his father wasn't such a perfect guy. He did have flaws, and that created the tension between him and Snape. But he also had father-son relationships with Sirius Black and Mr. Weasley. And yeah, there was a complicated, a lot of atonement with the father that Harry had to deal with. But his ultimate power was Voldemort. That was what was luring over him. So this part of the story, this is the climax. This is the big villain, the big dragon, the shadow that the hero has to face down and prove that he is a worthy opponent and that he does have power equal to or greater than this threatening villain. And it says apostasis, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be apotheosis. I think that's a typo, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's just a synonym. I was a little confused by that word, but ultimately what it is this is when the hero dies or kills a part of themselves or proves that they are willing to die, and then they are elevated to a higher or even a godly status. So Harry confronts Voldemort knowing that he might not live. Gandalf destroys the Balrog and returns as Gandalf the White. He comes back with a higher, more powerful status. Jon Snow gets murdered by the Night's Watch and then is resurrected. Sorry, spoilers, we're in spoiler territory now, so these examples are going to give things away. So I apologize, plug your ears if you don't know these things by now. I guess it's too late. Turn away, come back after on the next slide. Okay, the ultimate boon, this is the reward you get at the end of the journey. Various prizes, rewards, the end of a threat. You know, it can be a physical reward like Indiana Jones getting the Lost Ark or the Holy Grail, or it could just be destroying, ending the looming threat like the Death Star, for example. Then we have this refusal of the return. The hero doesn't always want to go back to their common world. Things are way more exciting and thrilling and satisfying on this side of that circle. They don't want to go back. So that's a theme that comes up. There's also a theme of magical flight when some supernatural thing takes them back to the hero back to their common world. So the giant eagles in Lord of the Rings show up and fly Sam and Frodo away from Mount Doom. This is when Dorothy clicks her heels and says there's no place like home, and she's magically returned back to Kansas. Rescue from without. This happens so often. This is kind of my favorite part of stories. Now that I'm more aware of it, I look for it more. But this is that exciting part where it feels like the hero is, oh my gosh, like this is like, what are they going to do? There's no way out. Like they are toast. They're dead, man. Like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? How can you possibly get out of this situation? So for example, Luke Skywalker is about to destroy the Death Star, but he's got a bunch of TIE fighters on his tail, and how's he going to pull this off? It's really exciting, but you want to look away because you think he's never going to make it. And then out of the blue comes Han Solo in the Millennium Falcon, gets rid of those TIE fighters so that Luke can focus on his task and blow up the Death Star. And Lord of the Rings, we see Sam is coaxing Frodo to let go of the ring and destroy it, and Frodo is resisting. He doesn't want to do it. He's not ready to let go. And then all of a sudden, Gollum comes lunging, grabs the ring, and falls into the volcano and destroys himself and the ring along with it. And another great example was from Jurassic Park, where it's right at the end of the film. The raptors have closed in. They've encircled all of the people with Ellie and Alan Grant and the kids. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, how are they ever going to escape? Those raptors have got them. And then in comes the T-Rex who bites down on one of the raptors. The others gang up, and now the dinosaurs are fighting each other, and that gives the humans the chance to escape. So those are examples of rescue from without. And then they cross the return threshold. So now you've stepped back into the common world. And there's, at this point of the story, there is usually one last trial where the hero has to prove that they have changed, that they have been reborn, or it proves how they are going to make decisions from here on out. So even though the big villain is destroyed or the dragon is slain, there's still some tiny threat out there, and the hero has to handle it. So an example in Lord of the Rings was, okay, so the ring is destroyed, Sauron is gone, but before they can return to the Shire, they still got to deal with Saruman. He's still out there. Katniss executes Coin instead of Snow. And then there's the Master of Two Worlds. So this is when Luke becomes a Jedi Knight. He was still that boy that grew up on Tatooine, but he is now also a Jedi. And then lastly, there's freedom to live. This is a release of duties, assignments, quests, punishments. Panem no longer has to send tributes to the Hunger Games. Robin Hood is pardoned for his crimes as an outlaw. He no longer has to hide in the forest now that King Richard is back on the throne. And so one thing in my research that it came across was that the return part of the story in modern stories is less emphasized than it was in ancient myths. Today's stories keep this part of the story very short and understated. But if we look at stories like the Odyssey and Odysseus, in contrast, his homecoming was way drawn out. You know, he didn't just land on the shores of his homeland after 20 years, get off the boat and walk straight into the arms of his family. It was a much, much longer story involving him pretending to be a pig farmer, and he had to encounter a whole bunch of his old servants one by one, who were the only people who recognized him. And there was this whole journey in itself before he finally got back to his castle. So that's just a difference between the old myths and our modern stories, is for some reason, I guess it's not as exciting, the homecoming, as the initiation phase. Okay, so let's talk about the archetypes in the hero's journey. So we start with the hero. Here we have Frodo, Harry, and Luke Skywalker, for example. I'm just going to check in and see if there's any comments here before I continue. Cool. Okay. People are just showing up saying hello. Hello, everyone. Okay, so we talked about the hero. Then we have the sidekick. So a kind soul who stays by the hero's side, then leaves and returns to save the day. So this happened in every case. The hero was separated from his sidekick, and then they swooped in and saved the day. And the mentor here is our old man wizard character, who points the way as far as he can. He gives the hero some tools, and then he dies. He always dies. I don't know why, but that's a thing. And the princess. Okay, in this graphic, they call her the princess. In the previous one, it was the goddess, but essentially, again, it's just that balance of masculine and feminine. So when we have a male hero, we have this feminine character who creates some kind of masculine-feminine balance that makes the hero whole. She often saves his butt a bunch of times, or vice versa. If it was a female hero, there would be a male character who provides that strength and that balance and that wholeness for the hero. The gentle giant, someone who's initially fearsome, proves he has a heart as oversized as his body, and Beard's help. We have Gimli, Hagrid, and Chewbacca. And the comic duo, again, here's another theme that we see, bumbling twins who never quite seem to get it right until they prove themselves in the end. So Merry and Pippin, Red and George, and the droids. And then here we have the villain, the shadow, the dragon, the ultimate power, the true face of evil that the hero has to destroy. The one in the black cape. Not always the case, but in these three situations, it's true. And then the villain's army, an inhuman, masked, and endless in number, and in the end, surprisingly easy to defeat. So the orcs, the dementors, and the stormtroopers. And this infographic was created by Dan Rome, so giving credit where credit is due. I just thought it was a great way to illustrate the hero's journey and the archetypes associated with it. Okay, so now let's get into the tarot. So we'll start with the first septenary of the major arcana. These 7 cards represent the self, where we formulate our identity in relation to our common world. So if we're comparing just to the hero's journey, this would be even before we receive the call. This is how we establish who we are before the call. These are our influencers. This is how we become the person that we ultimately change and evolve later on. But this is the basis. This phase is not only where we are born or the world that we are born into, but this is where our dragons and our demons and our shadows are born as well. So if we think back to our childhood, or children we know, every kid knows kindness, love, and generosity, but they also express anger and selfishness and greed. And so as we grow up, our parents and our community and our They tend to accept and reward good behavior, and they reject bad behavior. And so sometimes, if we don't get what we want as a child, maybe we throw a tantrum and our parents punish us to say, tantrums are not acceptable behavior. You go to your room. And so, in those kind of experiences where bad behavior is rejected or punished, we might think that our basic human needs are being threatened. So whether those are physiological, the need to belong or feel included, whether even needs of achievement, all these needs are biological and instinctual and with us from childhood. And so this is where all that happens, is in this phase right here. So card number 1, the Magician. This is where we learn that we can manipulate our environment through our own actions. This is when we develop motor skills. We learn that we can control things with our bodies and how our bodies interact with our environment. And we learn that actions have consequences. Card number 2, the High Priestess. We develop a desire for knowledge and understanding. We pick up on not just language, but on nonverbal cues so that we can tell if someone is sad or angry without them actually telling us. We pick up on those other cues and we can sense tension in a room, for example. Then we have the influence of the mother, the influence of the father. Card number 5 is education, the influence of education, religion, and community, society, fitting in, learning how to conform or be accepted by others. Next, with the Lovers, we develop friendships, romances. We start to get a taste for our own independence and make our own choices. And then the Chariot is that acting on our choices and moving in that direction. But yet, in the charioteer is still a soldier. He's still following orders. He may have a few choices, but he's still not quite fully independent. So this sets the foundations of the self, who we are in our common world, and how we form an identity in our environment. The second septenary is, if we're comparing it again to the hero's journey, this would be the part of the story that is the departure or the call to adventure. So if we look at the Strength card, this is after we have an established identity, we start to feel a bit of a restlessness inside ourselves. This is when things start to bother us, cause emotions, things get harder to contain, or we just start to feel a little bit less satisfied with our current circumstances. And then we have, here is our old man, our wizard guy, who comes along and says, hey, why don't you go on a journey? Maybe you can learn something about yourself. Followed by that, the next 2 cards are the realization that there are forces bigger than ourselves or outside of ourselves, and that we have a duty to maintain and restore harmony. And when there's a threat to our harmony, either inside or outside of ourselves, this is what gives us a cause. Now, the Hangman, that's the refusal of the call. This is when we go, I gotta think about this. I'm not sure this is for me. Let me, meditate on this or see if I'm really the guy. This is that pause and that reflection and maybe even a bit of denial. But regardless, there is no action happening. This is thinking and seeing things, from a different perspective. Then we have Death, which is crossing the threshold. Once you cross that threshold, there is no going back. This is leaving your previous self for good. This is letting it die so that you can be reborn. And Temperance is on the other side of that threshold, the calm before the storm. So not quite the belly of the whale, but you can see this figure. You can see a path in the background. So that's the journey ahead with the crown. You see the ultimate boon there waiting to be brought back or discovered. And temperance, you know, they're proceeding with caution because now we're on the outside of our comfort zone. So we're not rushing ahead. We are literally dipping our toe and checking things out and proceeding with caution and moderation. Okay. The last 7 cards in the major arcana, the third septenary, this is the initiation, trials, and return. This is the adventure where we ascend and come into power. This is the juicy stuff. This is where it gets good. This is the exciting part. So here right off the bat, the devil. This is our dragon. This is the big villain. This is what the ultimate power that we need to prove ourselves to, or that we can overpower. These are our demons that we have to face, followed by a crushing blow where our ego is completely rattled. Everything that we thought made us feel safe and secure is gone. This is the moment where we feel like, how can we ever recover? How are we going to get out of this mess? Like, there's no coming back from this. This is like the scariest part. But then comes the star. This is where we rediscover hope. This is when we encounter that rescue from without. This is when, you know, the T-Rex comes and distracts the raptors so we can escape. This is when Han Solo comes and gets the TIE fighters off our back. This is hope in our journey after we thought all was lost. And then the moon is the crossing the return threshold. This is that one last trial where we prove ourselves. And it can still have a little bit of discomfort. You know, we're not ready to go back. It can be the refusal of the return. But again, we see the path, just like we did in the temperance card. There is a path back to our common world. And then the sun, the victory where we emerge a hero. This is the restoration of harmony, the realization of our true power and potential. Judgment is our apotheosis, our ascension. This is where we rise. This is where Gandalf comes back as Gandalf the White. Heroes are reborn. They achieve a higher status or even a godly status. They are, this is that rebirth, reborn, resurrection phase of the hero's journey. And then the world, where we establish that sense of freedom, where our old world is saved, renewed, and the journey is complete. Okay, so next we're going to get into some nerdy bits of wisdom that I have pulled from some of our favorite quotes, from our favorite comic books, movies, video games, etc. So this is where you can play along if you want, and guess the tarot card that goes with it. So I have a question. Do you think these are stages of our life or actual calling in life? I think that we go through these, like, they're cycles, and sometimes they're like mini cycles, and sometimes they're bigger. Like this isn't necessarily from birth to death, but we probably go through this hundreds of times. Some are more impactful than others, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's start with our first quote of geek wisdom. With great power comes great responsibility. We all know this quote from Spider-Man. These are the wise words spoken to Peter Parker by his Uncle Ben before his uncle died tragically. Peter held himself responsible for the death of his uncle and was inspired by these words, and vowed to use his powers to fight crime and save lives instead of pursuing fame and fortune as a wrestler. We've also heard a similar quote from a famous young carpenter from Nazareth who said, "To whom much is given, much is expected." It's very much the same message there, but it took a comic book legend to turn this bit of wisdom into popular modern day proverb. And so I don't see any guesses here about which tarot card this might be. So I'm just going to go. I see this in the Ace of Swords. To me, the aces in the tarot are intended to be blessings and opportunities and new beginnings. But the Ace of Swords has always seemed to come along with a little bit of fine print. So there's an inscription that was commonly put on 18th century swords on a variety of different nations that was inscribed in Latin, and it translated, "Draw me not without cause, and sheath me not without honor." And this was a reminder to the soldiers that carried them to maintain their chivalry even in battle. So to draw the Ace of Swords in a reading is to receive the message that no matter what challenges lie ahead, you have the power, skills, and tools to overcome them, but be careful not to let that power corrupt you. Whatever weapons you possess should only be used if necessary and for noble causes. So that's how I see the Ace of Swords, and it is with great power comes great responsibility. Okay. I ask for so little, just let me rule you, and you can have everything you want. Just fear me, love me, do as I say, and I will be your slave. Sarah has her epiphany moment when she confronts Jareth, the Goblin King, at the story's climax. He pleads with her to obey him using tactics like guilt, threats, distractions, promises of love, and dreams come true. But her will is strong, and she begins to understand that the only power he has over her is what she gives him. And few leading females have asserted themselves when chosen to be single when faced with offers of romance. But Sarah proves she's the babe with the power when she learns to take responsibility finally for her own actions and persevere in an unfair world. And this is her response: "You have no power over me." Powerful. And we see this same lesson in the Devil card. So let's face it, let's be honest, the devil isn't all bad. Good things can be found in bad places, and the devil allows us the pleasures and indulgences. Even guilty ones are not so bad in moderation. Vanessa says that it seems like the devil or the Hierophant. Yeah, the Hierophant. What do you mean by that, Vanessa? Maybe. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on that. Okay. Where was I? The devil. Yeah, he allows us pleasures and indulgences as long as they're in moderation. But when those pleasures become leverage with which to control us, or we allow ourselves to overindulge to a point that impedes on other areas of our lives, and we know that we're cozying just a little too close with the devil. When the things or the people that we claim to love start to negatively affect our health and our happiness, yeah, we need to break those shackles. And breaking the shackles can be easier said than done, but it can be done. And so if you're unhappy with your relationship or your job, or you struggle with addiction, how much power are you allowing it to have over you? Or can you take that power back and reclaim your freedom and independence? So that's the lesson of the devil. And Jareth was, in his own way, much like the devil. Okay, so I love this next quote. Oh, sorry, I'm just checking the comments. The Hierophant talks about tradition and sticking to the status quo. I feel like it can sometimes be used as manipulation, but overall the quote is definitely more devil energy. Yeah, definitely. The Hierophant reminds us of our responsibilities. Okay, let's talk about Yoda and fear. This quote has stuck with me, and I definitely use this as a reminder in my everyday life. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Does it ever? I mean, we see this happening right now with all the crazy stuff happening and the hate and intolerance and fear mongering and hate mongering going on right now. And it all comes from fear. You know, all this anger, all this hate, fear is the root of all of it. And a lot of it is completely unfounded fear. Fear is connected to the ego. So think back to the last time you were angry and try to figure out what was the fear that was behind it all. So in the story of Star Wars, I'm sure you're all familiar, but for those who aren't, Yoda hesitates training 2 generations of Skywalkers because he, quote, senses much fear in them. He warns Anakin and Luke that fear, anger, and aggression are one-way tickets to the dark side, and once one starts on that path, it is almost impossible to come back from that. Luke learns to master his fears, but Anakin falls victim to its corruption. Anakin fears losing his mother, and after she dies in his arms, he takes out a violent revenge on those that took her life. And then later experiences premonitions of losing his wife to a similar fate and will stop at nothing to prevent it, even joining the dark side. So he disregards Yoda's warnings, comes to believe that the dark side is the only way he can save his beloved wife, and tragically, after she dies, he learns that it was his actions and paranoia that caused her fate to begin with, sealing his blackened heart in a suit of armor to match. So Anakin goes on to become the most iconic villain in pop culture history, Darth Vader. So the next time your ego makes you afraid, ask yourself if you'd rather be a Jedi or a Sith. And if you answer Jedi, then you gotta learn to master your fear. And so in the tarot, here we see what fear can do. This is the 9 of Swords, and it is a force to be reckoned with. It can be useful. There is a good side to fear. It can be used for our own self-preservation and prevent us from being reckless that could cause physical harm. But the ego uses fear for its own self-preservation as well. And if we are not brave enough to overpower it, we start to deny ourselves positive experiences. The best things in life are on the other side of fear. Fear is the #1 killer of dreams. We can be afraid of failure. We can be afraid of the unknown. We can be afraid of loss or rejection. This fear is self-destructive. So, you know, we might tell ourselves, I love this quote from this poet, Erin Hansen. She says, "What if I fall? Oh, my darling, but what if you fly?" So just remember that. It's like, yeah, there is a worst case, but there's a best case too. Okay, here's our next quote. The cake is a lie. I use this one all the time. My husband and I will joke and be like, no, the cake is a lie. So let me give you some context if you're not familiar with this game. It was declared the first true science fiction classic written in the medium of a video game. Portal exemplified oppressive and deceitful systems who use promises as a motivator without any intent of delivering them. As the player in the game, you are guided through a scientific research facility by a computer named GLaDOS and asked to perform various tasks. GLaDOS continuously promises you cake at the end of the experiment, but as you progress, it becomes increasingly suspicious that the research lab, Aperture Science, has no intent on letting you leave. And when GLaDOS says, there will be cake, what she really means is, you're gonna die. At various points, you see the words, the cake is a lie, just like in the picture here, scrolled on the walls throughout the lab, indicating that there have been others before you. And this phrase has become a catchphrase among geeks and gamers who use it to describe scenarios of false hope when chasing an unobtainable goal. So the cake is the I love you from an abusive partner. It's the snake oil to cure all ailments, or the promise of a better future by politicians to justify corrupt government policies or their own personal agendas. Even those of us who've seen what's really being served have a really difficult time convincing others, because how can you not love cake? Like, it's tempting, and it's hard not to believe. Okay. And we could argue this because after I wrote this, I started to maybe see this also in the Seven of Swords, so there's an argument for that, but I chose the moon here. And the moon, there's so many ways to interpret the moon card. Like, you could write an entire book on just the moon card, I think. But in this case, we'll go with this definition for this quote and this bit of wisdom. It represents illusions, fantasies, things that aren't as they seem. If we consider the moon, the real moon itself, it appears to light up the night sky, but it itself does not give off light. The light from the moon is technically the light of the sun. So without that knowledge, it can be deceiving. At night, things look a little bit differently than they do during daylight hours. Things appear stranger and more scary. And when you see this card in a reading, it usually advises some kind of caution. It could mean distractions, being led astray, wandering aimlessly, being lost. It also means illusions, nightmares, fears, hallucinations. It can mean deception, chasing fantasies, or being unrealistic. So when you see the moon in a reading, it's a call to open your eyes and see what's really going on before going any further. Okay, here we go. Lord of the Rings. Do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. This quote was said by Gildor and his party of elves when they encounter the hobbits in Lord of the Rings on their way home to Rivendell. They save the hobbits from being caught by the Nazgul and leave them gifts of food before disappearing in the night. So Gildor says this quote in response to the hobbits after they express concern for Gandalf's absence. The hobbits are like, hey, have you seen Gandalf? He was supposed to meet us and we can't find him. And the response was, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, yada yada. What he means when he says this is that important matters should be left to important people and lesser beings ought not get in the way. That is what Gildor meant. But there is another lesson in this quote. So we all know that if it wasn't for meddling hobbits, the story would have turned out way differently. So while Gildor was warning the hobbits about the wrath and punishment of annoying one's betters, Tolkien was telling the rest of us to think carefully before interfering with the affairs of those who carry the weight of responsibility, lest we find ourselves bearing similar burdens. And here we see that same lesson in the Ten of Wands. Tens represent the end of a cycle, and here we have built something and now we must reap what we've sown. This is about confronting the consequences of our actions and decisions. Even when we've worked hard and fulfilled a dream or accomplished a goal, responsibilities and commitments are often created as a direct result of that fulfillment. And so if you start to find yourself feeling overwhelmed or overworked, this is the time when you see the Ten of Wands that you start to look for solutions. Are you going to continue to shoulder the burden on your own? Are you going to recruit help? Are you going to put down your heavy load temporarily or permanently? And then what are the consequences of that decision? And so just for fun, I added this: do not meddle in the affairs of dragons, for you are crunchy and good with ketchup. This was a parody that came from the Lord of the Rings novels, and directly out of that quote. So just for fun, I added that in. All right, here is our next quote from The Dark Knight. Why so serious? And so you might be wondering, what kind of wisdom is that? And why are we looking to the Joker? Yes, why so serious is a catchphrase from The Dark Knight that is largely so popular due to the production company's marketing campaign that led to the movie premiere in 2008. I don't know if anyone, I didn't know this. I had no idea it was so huge. I don't remember this happening. Maybe some of you out there do. But there was this crazy elaborate marketing campaign that had literally 11 million fans turn hundreds of cities in 75 countries into real life Gotham cities. They were chasing clues. They were out on the street campaigning for Harvey Dent, who was not even a real politician. They were becoming copycat vigilantes. They were marching in the streets as the Joker's henchmen. They had all these kind of assignments, and it was that interactiveness and this game that was played. Like people were literally finding cell phones in cakes with messages and clues to the next event or the next thing. Like, it was crazy. Like, if you don't believe me, go to whysoserious.com and you can see the whole story. I don't know where I was. I don't remember any of this happening, but anyway, it happened, and that's what made this comment or this quote so popular. And when we finally heard it in the movie, the Joker said his infamous line. What happens is he momentarily flips our perspective of him from villain to victim. Like, we actually start to pity him because he relays the story of how he got his scars by describing his abusive father who cut a smile on his face for worrying about the safety of his mother. Why so serious? So this quote is used rhetorically in geek conversations to address a person who ought to look at themselves from the perspective of the others in the room. It calls attention to a presence that doesn't quite fit the otherwise jovial atmosphere and places accountability on the recipient of that why so serious. So in other words, it means lighten up, you're being a killjoy. The phrase can certainly be used by or abused by people who just are using it to be mean, but it allows those perceived to be overly uptight or too sensitive to consciously decide if they're willing to lighten up or be identified as too sensitive, or change their behavior to more adequately reflect, who they want to identify with. Do they want to be the killjoy? Is that good? Is that going to save people from danger, or are they really just being too sensitive and they need to lighten up? But no matter the incarnation of the Joker, and we've seen many from the cartoons to the comics to the variety of movies, he is always the archetypal trickster with a psychopathic twist. He makes it his personal duty to expose cultural, political, and ethical hypocrisies that society chooses to ignore. And he does this by executing these heinous criminal acts. But he really challenges us to think about why we do the things we do, and are they really good for us? However dilemic and terrifying for his victims, he takes great pleasure in forcing others, especially Batman, to confront their demons and see themselves in a different light. And we see this in the Hangman card. So with the presence of the Hangman, there are times to take control, and there are times when it's in our best interest to do the opposite. The Hangman shows up to advise us that it's time to hang back, and asks us to pause and take a good look at our situation from another point of view. How do things look now that they've been turned upside down or around? And that's what the Joker was particularly good at, twisting things so we could see them from another way. Are we still giving the intended impression? Are our actions having an impact on others, and is that impact negative or positive? And is that what we want to achieve? Is that the result we're hoping for? Or are we starting to see some unanticipated consequences? So the period of stagnation offered by the Hangman is best put to use by reassessing our beliefs and our next actions moving forward. And I love that. So the card on the right, the Hangman you see with the yellow border, that is from the Legend of Tarot, or the Legend of Zelda Tarot. And it is the Happy Mask Salesman from the video game. And he has two masks in this image. We have Majora's Mask on the ground and the Mask of Truth in his hand. And so there's an implication here that the Happy Mask Salesman has made a conscious choice. The Majora's Mask provides the wearer with great power that usually becomes deeply corrupted. And rather than risk that corruptive power, the hangman or the happy mask salesman has chosen the mask of truth, which, even though that can be uncomfortable or unpleasant, he still sees that as the better option of the two. Okay. Star Trek. Any Trekkie fans out there? I have been and always shall be your friend. Sob. These were Spock's dying words in The Wrath of Khan and have become a popular quote when expressing geek camaraderie. However, it's important to note that the friendship between Spock, Kirk, and McCoy was not automatic. These three men, each of great passion and intellect, were constantly on each other's nerve. Spock for being too literal and Kirk for being too reckless, yet over time, they found it more uncomfortable to be separated than to be together. And the cementing key to this Trekkie trinity was their lifetime of shared experiences and companionship during tragedy, as well as their common values that attracted them to Starfleet to begin with. When confronted with crises of our own, our current friendships tend to grow stronger or fall apart. So the longest lasting and deepest caring friendships that we have are often founded on mutual trust that has been tried and tested during periods of strife and hardship. So think about your own friendships. Think about who your best friends are, the ones you rely on and love the most or have the strongest bond with. And I guarantee you it's because that friendship has survived trials and tribulation, and it's formulated or cemented a solid mutual exchange of trust. Yeah. Oh, there's this quote here from Harry Potter, which I just love because it basically says the same thing. There are some things you can't share without ending up liking each other, and knocking out a 12-foot mountain troll is one of them. This is J.K. Rowling. She wrote that in her book to kind of solidify the fact that Hermione was now officially friends with Ron and Harry. And where do we see these lessons of friendship? In the tarot, we see it in the Three of Cups. Usually this card is depicted with three characters, usually women, and they're usually bonding over drinks. The ambience is always jovial and suggestive of a party taking place. The Three of Cups teaches us the value of community and friendships. It reminds us that we cannot be our best when we are alone in isolation, that we rely on others at the very least for emotional support and validation. As naturally social creatures, being around others who approve of us and understand us is essential to creating a sense of belonging and therefore a state of happiness and self-worth. Friendships are important not only for our happiness and self-worth, but for expanding our viewpoints and formulating an identity outside of our family unit and professional environment. These relationships allow us to explore new interests, new ideas, and they provide us with opportunities to grow as individuals emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. There's this great quote by the first Doctor Who says, "As we learn about each other, we learn about ourselves." And that's a great segue into my next quote. Doctor Who, and I love this. When I was watching this episode, I wanted to give up and give a standing ovation. You're not superior to people who are cruel to you. You're just a whole bunch of new cruel people, being cruel to some other people who will just end up being cruel to you. The only way anyone can live in peace is if they're prepared to forgive. So why don't you break the cycle? That was said in Doctor Who by the 12th Doctor, Peter Capaldi, in 2015. So let me give you some context around this scene and this quote. This was a critical moment on the brink of a button push that was going to execute a human genocide. And it started with a revolution of radicalized Zygons, the Zygons were an alien race that were permitted to live on Earth as long as they were disguised as human beings. As the treaty between themselves and UNIT started to break down, the Zygon extremists began using the Justice Mask slogan, truth or consequences, as both a threat and a rally to their cause. This disgruntled group no longer wanted to live in the shadows of mankind, and if mankind wouldn't accept them for who they are, then they were willing to kill everybody. So, as a champion of justice, the Doctor swoops in, seeking out fairness and harmony. He is a ideal peacemaker and pacifist, refraining from violence unless absolutely necessary. He was always seeking out diplomatic solutions to resolve conflicts. He was often acting as an objective mediator between two hostile opponents, and he understands better than most the relationship between actions, or choices, in other words, and consequences. And a large part of his underlying darkness comes from the burden of regret he carries as a result of making difficult and destructive decisions. So I felt like the Doctor exemplified justice in many ways. So first, he flies around in a time machine that looks like a police box, and it reads on the outside, advice and assistance obtainable immediately. Officers and cars respond to all calls. Second, he possesses a deep sense of right and wrong and a conviction to intervene whenever injustice occurs, which sets him apart from the rest of his race of Time Lords who follow a very strict ethic of not getting involved. Okay, in this quote, the Doctor showed me a better way of living your life. You don't just give up. You don't just let things happen. You make a stand. You say no. You have the guts to do what's right when everyone else runs away. And so let's just compare him to Lady Justice for a moment. Just like her blindfold she wears, the Doctor does not discriminate. In 900 years of time and space, I have never met anyone who wasn't important. That was the 11th Doctor, Matt Smith, who said that. In her hands, back to Lady Justice, there are two objects. One is a set of scales to represent the weight of collective facts and evidence against that of a fit punishment to bring out the restoration of harmony and peace. And the sword in her other hand was there to remind us that justice can be swift and final. And likewise, the Doctor is very clever and observant, and he relies heavily on observable facts in order to deduce conclusions that allow him to make quick decisions and solve problems peacefully. And I just had to throw this quote in because, again, it relates to, this was said 40 years ago, and yet it's still relevant today. The very powerful and the very stupid have one thing in common. They don't alter their views to fit the facts. They alter the facts to fit their views, which can be very uncomfortable if you happen to be one of the facts that needs altering. And so, no surprise, we see this in the Justice card, which can represent pending legal issues and the need to consult legal experts, but more often it is an omen cautioning us to deliberate carefully before making the next move. If we're confronted with a big decision, we should be collecting as much information as possible. We need to be seeking out reviews and references and remembering to read the fine print. This card asks us to weigh all of our options very carefully before we commit to a final decision. Justice is also about establishing order, balance, and harmony. It is a time to right wrongs or accept things that happened as they were meant to happen. She indicates fair and final outcomes and warns us to be mindful of our actions and our consequences. Her presence also calls for us to be honest with ourselves regarding our motives, because there is a very fine line between seeking justice and seeking revenge. And I love this quote from Stephen Covey. I think he wrote the 7 Habits series. While we are all free to choose our actions, we are not free to choose the consequences of our actions. And that is something many people forget. And so on the topic of justice, I just want to give a nod to Batman. Justice the Knight of Justice himself. Justice is about harmony. Revenge is only about making yourself feel better. So that was a quote from Batman Begins. Okay, last one. We're nearing the end here. Harry Potter. Love this quote. Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if only one remembers to turn on the light. Dumbledore was always leaving cryptic messages for his students. And it was probably because he saw the value in allowing them opportunities to think for themselves rather than spoon-feeding them all the answers. When we think about Harry Potter and darkness and how I think the Dementors are a perfect metaphor for periods of darkness in our own life. So if we think about what Dementors did in the story, they drained people of all hope and happiness and left them only with unpleasant memories. So that's what happens if a Dementor got the best of you. And the best way to counter a Dementor is a Patronus charm. And so as a wizard, in order to cast a Patronus charm, there were two things that were required of you. One, you had to have self-esteem. You had to believe in yourself. And two, you had to think of a happy memory. And so we can apply this to our own lives when we are faced with fear, depression, grief, sadness. We can think of those things as Dementors. And there are ways that we can still seek out what is bright in our life. We can metaphorically cast a Patronus if we have self-esteem and happy memories. So as long as we can remember to turn on the light, the darkness cannot consume us. And so in the tarot, this is represented by the star, which is a sign of hope. The star represents that wish, we wish upon stars. We look to the stars to guide us home when we're lost. The star teaches us about the power of faith and belief that a new day will give us a better future. And as long as we have faith in ourselves and in others or in a higher power, we have the courage to endure hard times and manifest love and light in spite of any trials. The star represents kindness, forgiveness, understanding, healing, and positive transformation. So if you can find the faith, trust, and courage to embrace these aspects of the star, you will be rewarded with peace, higher self-esteem, and renewed happiness. Okay, so a little bit of shameless self-promotion here since I have all of your attention. I have a special offer to make. So on my website, I offer GEEK readings, and for a limited time, when you purchase one of these readings, I will follow up and give you a second reading in 1 month's time, absolutely free. So you pay for the first one, and the second one is free. So you're essentially getting two for the price of one, but you have to purchase in the next 2 days. So you have until Tuesday at midnight, or like to the end of the day Tuesday. Technically, I guess that's Wednesday morning at midnight, and then the offer disappears. So I'm just going to take you over to my website. Okay, so we're here. Now when you go to my tarot page, this is what you see. We'll scroll down and you click this button, roll for initiative, and it takes you straight to my GEEK reading offers. And so all of these readings here, they have different themes. Use the Force has a Star Wars theme. True Love is for couples. But again, there's this hero's journey theme woven into it. It's got a Princess Bride theme to it. Big Damn Hero. We have Firefly. And all of these readings, or almost all of them, have this theory of the hero's journey. So you as the hero on your journey, what are your trials? Who are your companions? Who are your friends that are going to support you and help you? What tools do you have? What weapons do you have to conquer your obstacles and defeat your dragon and your shadow and come out even more powerful than you were before. So depending on, you know, either your favorite fandom or your own unique needs, these can offer you, you know, different things. So yeah, the Princess Bride one, like I said, was for couples, but again, the couple would be like the hero as a pair, as a unit together. You know, what trials do they face together? You know, who's trying to stop them? Who's the prince that's getting in the way? Or the metaphorical prince. You know, it doesn't have to be a person. It could be a thing that threatens to separate you. Or, you know, what is the strength? How do you come up with the strength to overcome these trials? Who's there to support you? Who's there to help you? Or what is there to help you? If you're a Firefly fan, then maybe, you know, you think of Firefly, they had missions, they transported cargo from point A to point B, but there were always obstacles along the way. Who are you seeking counsel from? How do you stand up to adversity? How do you, you know, what weapons do you have to help you get to your destination? And what is the reward you get at the end of your destination? Again, you know, here we have Super Mario, a Super Mario theme. Pipes, pits, and Koopa armies are your trials, your obstacles, but ultimately you've got to defeat King Koopa to rescue the princess. And so, you know, what is that boon? What is the reward at the end? Who are your friends to help you? All these things are in all of these readings, so it just depends, you know, what your favorites are. The wibbly wobbly timey wimey reading as a Doctor Who theme. It's great for when you're confronting challenges. You know, who is there to help you? Where are you going? What do you need to exterminate in order to achieve your goal? And what do you find when you get there? How do you face fears? Again, here is Hunger Games themed reading. What things are out there to help you? Who are your allies? Who are your enemies? What are your weapons? Who can you trust? What do you need to do to come out victorious? There is the hero's journey woven into that theme too. Now, the Faith of the Seven is a little bit different. It is a lot more open-ended. Really, almost any question goes, and it, you know, you're just consulting the Maiden, Mother, Crone, Father, Warrior, Smith, and Stranger, the seven gods and goddesses from the Faith of the Seven in Game of Thrones. So it's a little bit different, and I got to give credit. This spread was created by Fable's Den, so you can click on the link there if you are a tarot reader yourself, and you can try this spread on your own. And even the My Little Pony reading that I offered, the Love and Laughter, has that hero's journey. You know, it does focus on the 6 elements of harmony. There were 6 elements of harmony in Equestria, which is the land of the ponies, and each of those elements were personified by one of the 6 friends, the 6 pony friends, and each of them had their own unique skills. So again, it's about what gives you courage to step across the threshold. Who are your companions? Who do you learn how to trust? Or you know, how do you incorporate those elements of harmony into your life? And then what is your unique cutie mark that makes you stand out? So yeah, when you purchase one of these readings, you pay for the first one, and then as a bonus, I will give you a follow-up in 1 month to see where you're at in your personal journey, if you've overcome any trials, if you've faced your dragon, and what is next for you. So we'll do a second follow-up reading totally free, but I need to receive that order by the end of the day on Tuesday. Okay. Now, oh, what have I done? I want to go to the next slide here. Why is it letting me? Okay, one sec. Technical difficulties. Where are my notes? Here we go. Okay, so I talked about an exercise, and here it is, I think. We have it? Yep, we have it up. Okay, so this was a exercise I created. I've designed it to be an Instagram challenge, so you'll see this image go up either the end of August or September 1st, by September 1st at the latest. And there are 3 parts, so part 1, and there's 10 questions per part. And if you've never done an Instagram challenge before, how it works is you do approximately one, you can be flexible, but the idea is that there's one question, 30 questions, so one question per day for the month. Every day you answer one of the questions using your tarot or oracle cards, and you take a picture and you share it on Instagram, and then you tag me and use the hashtag the Hero's Journey Challenge. So if it was a different Instagram challenge, you would use its associated hashtag, but I've got the hashtag and my tag listed there so that it's convenient. You don't have to go looking for it, it's right there. Part 2 is the initiation questions on your hero's journey, and part 3 would be the return. So there's 10 questions about the return. Now, I did create we're almost out of time, it's 6 o'clock already, so I want to wrap this up as soon as possible. I don't want to keep you guys any further, but I do want to let you know there is another video I created. I think I posted it on the event page, but it's also on YouTube, and it explains all of these questions in much more depth and detail. So if you want to learn more about this exercise, go watch the other video, and it explains it a lot better. But look for this on Instagram, and I'll be doing this along with everybody else. And there's different ways you can do it. You could do this purely as an exercise to practice your tarot skills. You could do this to help you use it as prompts for your own story that maybe you're writing if you're a writer. You could apply it literally to your own life. And probably if you're applying it to your own life, then you might be at a different phase than, say, part 1. Maybe you're in the middle of part 1, maybe you're already progressed into the initiation phase, maybe that's where you're struggling right now, or that's where you're at. So anyway, I don't want to spend too much more time on this because I did create another video explaining all this. So I'm going to go over to the comments and just see if anyone has any questions about anything I talked about before I wrap it up and sign off. How's everyone doing? Okay, so looks like a great challenge. Not sure I'll be able to do the whole thing, but I'm looking forward to giving it a try. The video was excellent. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope you got something useful out of it. If there's no other questions, then I am going to sign off, let everyone go have dinner, and that was amazing. There's a book in there. Yeah, I'm sure there is. This is something that has been life-changing for me, and I incorporate this now in my own life and in my tarot practice when I'm coaching my clients using tarot cards. So yeah, this has been amazing. Joseph Campbell is my hero. Okay, everybody. I think that's it. I hope you guys all have a great week and enjoy the eclipse without looking at it directly. Stay safe tomorrow morning. I will see you guys next time in the meeting. Stay shiny and keep sparkling. Bye.